It's very exciting. It's like a rocket. It's amazing.
And we're launching. Dan, we're back.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Good to see you. We're both
Good
like
to see you. I
dressed for
know.
colder weather.
I know.
Well,
You're
I
in
am.
layers. You're
Yeah.
in layers. I'm actually wearing something with sleeves. So,
Yeah. You want to wear sleeves where I am.
um, how am I doing? I am busy. I mean, that sounds so cliche, but I am busy and I am also borderline frustrated because I, like you, have been working on some projects and some workflows, building agents, putting agents into these workflows, thereby creating agentic workflows. And yeah, I've been pretty frustrated because I'm making progress, but it's still a challenge. It's still a challenge. Yeah. How are you doing?
Good. I mean, we were talking before. I mean, I'm doing well. I mean, I really like the stuff that I do, but I also think that we're in an era where people think there's a magical button that you push that everything gets done. And that is not true.
But Dan, AI is a magic wand. Like I just wave AI over everything and everything goes, right?
I think people think that, and I think at all levels, I think, yeah, I mean, we could get into this and we should get into it because it's not like you and I are probably building stuff that's kind of pretty serious. Like I'm building stuff that's like businesses, like that are like a business function in software. And it's interesting to see how, I mean, where I'm not a traditional software developer, I feel bad. I feel like I've like aligned with like the spirits of all the software developers I worked with in the past. Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm
We
going to
should,
tell.
yeah, that this is probably a good point to say as a disclaimer. Neither Dan nor myself are actually engineers or developers by trade. Yet we both are finding ourselves retroactively kind of looking back at our conversations with technical stakeholders and going, yeah, sorry guys, didn't understand. Didn't understand.
Yeah. And I think okay, so on the positive side, yes, for all the people that are like fans of AI or are interested in learning about AI and people that we talk to, you can do more stuff than you ever were able to do before. And people that are, and it is true, like, you hear this in the media and stuff that, there's going to be an individual that's going to create the next billion-dollar company with one or two people. That is true. You can build out software, you can build out solutions. But I think that the thing that probably we're going to end up talking about is that it's not easy and it doesn't always work. And it's also not, unfortunately for the developers out there, that it's not the same traditional software process either. So you can't really adhere to those traditional methodologies.
Yeah, so you bring up a really good point, which is basically that we, yeah, I mean, you can't log on to LinkedIn without someone showing like something cool that they've built, or, that's what the news headlines are about. And quite frankly, that's what these companies want us to see, right? Someone is using their platform or their tool, as part of like their tech stack to essentially, multiply, right, their impact and their effort. Um, but the reality that you and I are living, and I think a lot of other AI practitioners are living, is that it still requires a lot of effort. It's just that this effort now comes into play in different places than, say, if you were purely technical or even if you were like a non-technical person before.
Absolutely.
TLDR, AI makes it cool, AI makes it easier, but it's still not freaking easy.
It isn't. And I mean, there's just so much we could talk about why it isn't easy too. I mean, one of the things just to flag in, but I'm sure we'll get into it all, is that you won't have to own the data. You have to own you have to own a couple things. You have to have data that you can access that's good. So if you don't, then you have nothing. You just have an idea and an architecture that's pointing to data that you don't own. And then you also have to have like the hardware and software that like connects everything. And I say this because I mean I teach at like the graduate level, and I have these students that want to build like amazing things, and I'm like, oh, and I know they don't have the data, like they don't at all. So it's like, it's not like, even if they were to design or build something, they're building it on a prayer. There's nothing to reach into. So
Okay, so you bring up something important, which is like the data piece. And I feel like all of the makings of a successful AI process, AI project, AI product comes down to probably like several components, right? That you and I are very familiar with. You just talked about like the data. You also talked about like the infrastructure, right, for the data. Um, Probably need to know like what the intent, right, and the outcome is of said thing. And basic and obviously like what your tech debt is and kind of all of the situational kind of variables around it. And when you say all these things and when we talk about all these things, what's kind of obvious to me is that even with the presence of AI, AI can't figure all of that out for you. We actually need to be the ones to tell the AI or direct the AI based off of all of those things. And that is harder than a lot of people think that it actually is.
I completely agree. You have to do it, you have to tell it, and then also you have to the other side. So there's so many things to think about it. You have to be the architect that designs it. You have to have access to the data. You have to have the machines that will do it, that you can build on. And I'm not just talking about the workstation that you work from, but like, are there servers set up, and is there pipelines and
Servers, Dan, what are you talking about?
yeah, we can talk about all that stuff. And then there's also that you have to maintain it, because it's like a race car, right? So like, you don't know, but Ferrari didn't. They don't build race cars and then they say see ya. You have to have like a mechanic, and so you have to have a system to maintain that stuff. And so yeah, it's exciting times because people like perhaps some of the people that are listening, and a lot of the people that we see on LinkedIn and TikTok are like really excited about this stuff. But I think it's important to recognize that there's the part that you see that is just initially the kind of the hype story. And then there's the reality of building something beyond the first release, you know?
100%. I mean, it's typical like iceberg effect, right?
Yeah.
We only see kind of like what's popping up above the surface because even at every step of the way, I think the expectation is, especially like when I am working with clients, this idea that, the total build time, you know, should be minuscule, right, compared to what it should be, and that the problems or kind of the bugs and the errors shouldn't be, as prolific, right, as it was before, and that really anybody can kind of jump in and get their hands dirty and like try to your point, maintain it. And I don't want to discourage anyone from it because again, that's the exciting part. That's the that it, you and I are primary examples of how this technology can suddenly propel like schmucks like you and me, right,
Yeah.
to do work like this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I still have to remind these folks it's still work,
Yeah.
right? It's not a what is that? A plug and play sort of thing where it's like, oh, here's the AI. I'll plug it into your system. Now everything goes.
And it's amazing how really smart people, because I imagine that your clients you're working with in general are very smart people on the scale of level of education and achievement, have bought into this thing about that it is just plug and play. And so, for example, I think you probably, because we're both foodies and it's will work for food, but you probably watched that show, The Bear, right? Have you seen the show The Bear? Right? And I mean, I've worked in quite a few restaurants when I was younger. They have that character that like that big guy that like with a mustache that like always fixes things, right? He's like the fixer of the refrigeration units, and he's
Yeah.
like he's on staff. He's not a chef. He's not. Well, eventually he becomes, I guess, like a maitre d' or something like that. But his job for years as a character on the show is the guy that fixes the refrigeration when it goes down and fixes.
Yeah, everyone needs a fact.
Yeah, yeah, and then and like I mean, it's not the sexy thing about the people that like own the restaurants or the front end staff or the very highly paid chefs, but there's a person that does that stuff, and that's what keeps the business running. And I don't, nobody ever, I imagine that you probably have talked with clients that think, like when you said about the hourly basis, we just build this and then it'll run my business. When in fact, it's really more, we'll build this, there's a cost, and there's a cost to maintain it, and it's a new way of doing business, right? Whereas it's not, it's a new way of doing business, but it's a cost, it's a cost center. It still has a cost to maintain it. And
It, that's especially true, and I think that's why so many people maybe approach this from a completely disoriented state, right? Where on the one hand, maybe a lot of these people say like leaders, more of the non-technical people kind of anticipate less friction, right? Being like, great, like plug and play, we're AI enabled, we're AI ready, like let's do it. And then versus like the technical stakeholders who, to your point, are now in a completely different playground, right? In terms of uh, what's possible, how to interface with these tools, and what to work. So now suddenly everyone's like pieces have moved on the board,
yeah.
and we have to figure out like how to play them. Um, but it's I think it all speaks to this idea of what's really possible with AI versus like what is really like being, I don't know, communicated or broadcast in
Yeah.
AI, because what we see nonstop, I see it in my own LinkedIn feed of like success after success after success. But like that iceberg effect, that success comes after fixing so many errors, so many bugs, like broken connections, like the API call didn't work. And while people like you and me who, again, don't have that technical background can be more fluent with them, it doesn't mean that we never deal with them. Um, and on top of that, we also now have to learn this has been the kind of the biggest mindset shift for me is now we then have to learn how to not just communicate this to the non-technical folks, but communicate these things to the AI itself, right? Like I am talking to Claude Code to be to say, this error is happening. I don't understand why this error is happening. Like, can you please like walk me through it or, debug, report back? And I am learning in real time whilst also like troubleshooting. It's and that can kind of make it feel like it's doubly work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly my experience. I think it's interesting because well, let's say projecting forward because like obviously developers are now threatened. Even the best developers admit that they're using things like Cloud Code. Like the lead developers at Amazon are saying at AWS are saying they're using Cloud Code. The lead developers at Anthropic are using Cloud Code.
Everybody's using Claude Code.
Everybody is, right? And so these are people that are like have a much higher pay grade than you and I in their dev experience, and they're using things like Cloud Code. I think that what's gonna what that speaks to is there's a reality that actually is not put out in like LinkedIn or TikTok, which is that it is actually work. It's just that you can make things, you can grow things much faster. You can build, you can take things to market much faster. I also think what's going to happen, and maybe this is like kind of veering away from the core subject, is that I think that there's a couple places where the market is. There's like the hype, and then as a result, people believe something that's not really true. And then there's the something that's partially true, which is yes, you can build something fast, but in order for it to succeed, you need to have a team to maintain it, and you have to have access to data, and you have to have the machines, which is what I was saying before. And so there's the not true, which the large part of the audience believes, the partially true, the presently true, meaning people are spinning out platforms. And I think I told you this last time we talked. I saw an interview with the lead developer at Anthropic that built out Claude Cowork.
Right.
And they released it and it's still in beta. They were like, well, we're making it go live. Like they developed it in like 2 weeks and released it, which means it is in its present tense is true. It doesn't mean it's not going to change. It's just that it's good enough. And this is from a huge company. I think what's going to happen is there's going to be that spectrum where the super developers, the really successful businesses are going to lean more closely into I'm finding a way to make this work and make it work the most efficiently. In that I did do something in Lovable and it looked pretty good and I launched it, but it doesn't work for more than 100 people at a time. And then I made it so that it can work for 1,000 people at a time. And now I have like a really valuable platform that can work for like 10,000 people at a time. And I think that as the maturity of the market goes, we will be pushed. Those that are like you and I will be pushed to be better. But I think the rest of the market still believes that it's just a push button thing.
Yeah, and that's a completely valid point because that idea of plug and play, like, just press go, now we've made it. It is, I see that zeitgeist a lot in LinkedIn in terms of like, here's that release. And again, what I mentioned earlier, what people don't see or what is actually required of the process, and quite frankly, is the force multiplier here, is that AI superpower is that it compresses the whole iteration process, right? So it doesn't make things easy, but it makes things easier that you can release a proof of concept. You can have your V1. You can continue to iterate. You can continue to build. Um, and that's where I think that's where the success lies, and that's where quote unquote the overnight success is, right? Of a lot of these things. Cowork you brought up is a primary example of that, where it was completely rough around the edges, and a lot of people, experienced that or were kvetching about it, not understanding that it's basically this principle of building out loud, of thinking out loud, and iterating in the process and having people tested enough that they got real a real feedback loop to then determine, okay, how do we proceed with this? And there's this misalignment, I think, between our own, and I use our, right, collectively, in terms of our expectations around that plug and play thing of like, it's done, I don't ever have to deal with it, I can move on to quote unquote the next thing, versus this idea of, okay, we're going to iterate on this. It's imperfect. We have a problem with imperfection. Let's be honest, right? We want to, hit publish, and suddenly, like, there's our 1 billion right dollar app. But that's the one thing that I see missing from most people, and that includes the people that I work with, and myself included, in terms of this idea of being really comfortable with iteration and launching with good enough to then build on that. And I don't know what your experience has been, but that's been something that I have had to get used to as someone driving this project, right? Not just in terms of stakeholder management, being like, hey, slow your roll, but also in terms of my own expectations of what minimum viable is, right? And um, making that not a handicap for the success of the project or the product.
I mean, there's so much to think about. I agree with what you said. I think there's so much to think about. Like I try to think about like a healthy way to come out, right? Like, and like, part of that might be us understanding what is good enough as a minimum viable product, like what you were saying a moment ago. I think because these things, and I had a conversation with somebody earlier today, that AI is fundamentally transformative. We're all going to have to get used to transformation, but not transformation as in you turn it on and you are therefore transformed. Transformation is moving. We're moving down, we're moving in a racetrack that's going really fast. And you can either choose to transform and you're shape shifting as you go around the racetrack. You don't push a button and therefore you're the best race car ever. You're like literally building the race car as you're going down the racetrack. And I think it's up to, so first of all, I think it's up to people like you and I to convey that, because there's been a like kind of a buyer mentality with like SaaS and software, like I pay for this and it's done and it does this thing. But that's not transformative. That's buy something, get something. And what we're doing is we're going around a racetrack and we're building the race car as we're going around the racetrack. And so I think it's more incumbent upon us to communicate to our clients and to the people we work with that that's what the experience should be. That you should expect that we can get you an MVP, and it will do amazing things. And welcome to the world of the MVP that maybe now it will break. But it will do something incredible for you that you weren't able to do before. So you get the transformation, but you have to ride a race car that's not fully built. You
Right.
know?
Yeah, and to be clear, easier said than done,
It
right?
is.
Because getting people, I don't know what it is, but I'm guilty of this too. We have a fear of this idea of MVP, like in that, there's good enough, and then there's that thought, I think that enters everyone's heads is that, is it good enough? There's always that kind of doubt. Um, and this is where I look to some things like product management principles, right? In terms of, what can you get everyone to agree on? And that is like the hardest part of this whole process and feels like prime territory for people, right? For human beings to get everyone on the same page and aligned to say, hey, you know, um, you know, everyone in the RACI chart. Like, this is what it means for MVP for this duration of time. Because what I'm finding is, I don't know, people, I don't know if I would call it scope creep, but it's surprising to have some conversations wherein, we think that we are kind of pursuing the right goal. And then suddenly a stakeholder comes in and says, but what about this? And it's nowhere kind of in previous conversations, but it's proposed with, well, what about this? Can't AI just do it?
Well, that's the same as it always has been.
And I have to take a beat when they say that. I'm just like, okay, okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's the same as it always has been. In that, I think that developers and designers and product builders have always had this like somebody has come to them and said, well, can't it just do this? And you're like, well, that's not in the spec. And sure, we could do it. I mean, the I think the to me the big challenge is that it can do all these things, but again, we have to communicate like we're literally building a race car that goes around that is literally going around the racetrack. And so you get the speed of saying, well, look, I didn't have a race car yesterday. I never had a race car. And now I have a race car. And so what you need is you need a pit crew. I'll give you an example. This is a project I worked on a while back. The old model, I was working with a financial service company, and for reporting, they would generally go and find the files on somebody's computer that somebody kept, and they would trust that that person had the most recent files. So they were not even really based on a server. And then they would go find the person that had permission to access the external research, and then they would pull it into somebody else's spreadsheet and run calculations and trust that the calculations were correct. So from an external file that somebody had access to, a permissioned like community, they'd pull data into somebody else's Excel spreadsheet and expect that that person's calculations in that Excel spreadsheet would render the file. Then they would take the spreadsheet information and they would bring it in as images. And then they'd go over to somebody else's computer where they thought they had the templates, and they would paste in the images of the data. And then they would publish that as the final file. And this is like professional grade work. And this literally would take months. It would take like a month to do the work. And so we were building out a system that, like the race car, that was basically like, oh no, you're not going to do that anymore. We're going to house the data. We're going to pull the data. We're going to have AI that's going to calculate the data. We're going to validate the data. We're going to publish it. It's going to be surfaced to everybody. Everybody can look at it. It's going to be referenced. And they were against that transformation because they always thought, well, but I always go to Mary, for Mary has the Excel spreadsheet. And I go to Joe because Joe has the connection to this external data that we borrow. And so they were resistant to the transformation, even though they got something that I'm saying was literally 20 times faster. And then they did what you're saying. Then they also started doing the, well, can it just do this? And you're like, wait a second. You don't, you're resistant to it being 20 times faster. And then when it is 20 times faster, you also want it to do something else. And you think that that should just happen. And I think, I don't know, I think it's upon us, because I don't know who else is going to do it, but people like you and I, that we're just going to have to do a better job of communicating how this stuff goes.
Agreed. And I also want to put the onus on everyone else, like existing in this plane, because, when we talk about transformation, it's not just transformation, like in terms of what AI can write, like do for your business, right? And your processes. What I would also love to emphasize is the transformation required of like all of the people, right, in this process to, I'm just going to say it, to be better, to shift kind of your approach because you and I know it's basic business. You all get aligned on an objective, on a vision, and that you stick to that scope and that MVP. But the reality is with something like AI, and I admit, I agree. When someone finally sees or it clicks for someone like what the AI can do, then they start to see the possibilities, right? Then they get very excited, right, as a stakeholder. And that's what we want. But while keeping that spirit, it's this idea of, okay, you see the possibilities, you're excited, rad. However, how do we make sure that you do not lose sight of, say, that discernment and that judgment call, right? Of what is enough for this period and or what is going to be the target, right, for the future. And I will fully admit that as someone who is in this space, I am still navigating managing those expectations, right, with people in terms of I want, I really want to baby that excitement. I want to foster it. And yet at the same time, it's trying to coach them to understand how do we translate that enthusiasm then into how you translate um, that into a PRD or a spec in terms of what is possible for the realm of possibilities, right, for your business and for your product.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in that same place. I really love like creating the excitement because I think sometimes let's face it, we're kind of probably adrenaline junkies in that we're like always caught up with like what
Totally.
right, and it's exciting to get people excited, and it's also like we have to play both sides of the coin. We have to kind of tell them, no, that's not true. ChatGPT doesn't do that, and that's not a full stack application. But you still want them excited because I do really realize that once they figure out that there's something they can do that's even small, that's transformative, like small, like as in a contained task, right? I need to do research for these projects that come up once a week. Every week, I have to fill out this report, and it takes me 8 to 14 hours. And then you say, well, for let's say 14 hours of consulting or 28 hours of consulting, we can find a way to get it down to 2 hours. No, 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 you can't. Yes, yes, we can. And imagine then that that's meaning the people's work after 2 weeks is gone from 14 hours and 14 hours, 28 hours to 4 hours or 5 hours. They start believing, right?
That is
Because
not insignificant.
that is very significant. And
Yeah.
we're not talking about end to end kind of full business stack development. We're just talking. So I do get very excited about it. I feel like the again, I feel like the relationship or the communication is it's going to have to be on us because I think that there's this misconception about what is achievable, and and I just think it's going to be on us. I don't know who else is going to take it because I know that like Sam Altman's not going to. Like, there's just too much hype about what ChatGPT can do all the time, and
They have investors to answer to, of course
yes, he
not.
does. He does.
No, that makes complete sense. And it's this idea that I've been swirling around, which is what AI makes possible before is this is basically that we can compound reality. That's what iteration is now. That compounding reality is so much better than compounding theory, right? It would be nice if, or what if. Well, AI makes it so that those ifs can become possibilities much more rapidly. But instead of, having this sort of one glorious shot, it really is about this sort of like consistent practice, right? And consistent return. To your point about, the recurring, the redundant, sort of the mundane, that's compounding reality in action, and that's like what gets people into that aha AI moment. And now, yeah, you've got me thinking in terms of how I can frame that in those conversations, in terms of limiting the scope, not to be a wet blanket, but like limiting the scope in the spirit of like compounding reality, right? We get this iteration done. The next iteration can include this. The next iteration is that. And when you stack all of those together, that compounding reality gets you so much farther than stopping and starting a project, right?
Oh, yeah.
In the name of like adding on more bells and whistles. And no, that's your what you just said is kind of leading me there, and I've got more ideas and how to script this thing. Yeah.
I will say that we specifically, not to like expose you to any like, business secret, like one of the things that we do when we consult is we literally advise people to start small and find something that's really small and not go after the big thing, because the big thing actually has a lot of potential errors and licensing rights and data access and machines, and there's no guarantee, just like the small thing, there's no guarantee that it will work. There's a probability that it will work, but also you're limiting the risk. And so, like, if you go and you find, I hate to say this because it's kind of the secret sauce, but it's not so secret, is that if you find a way to show people something that they do that, let's say, is 6 hours or 8 hours of work that they do on the regular, and then you can find a way to not only chop that way down, which which you and I know we can do, like easily by 30 to 40%, if not 80 or more percent
Right.
of time. But it's not just the time, you can make it better, right? So let's say you put a stake in the ground, you say, let's just contain it to this. Because part of it is that, and this is part of the conversation I was having this morning with somebody, was that we're still trying to like culturally educate people about what they can and can't do. And that's what works, is like they start believing, the problem is that you can't turn off the fuel, right? Once they see that, they're like, oh, well, then I guess I can do this other thing. You're like, oh, I want more. But I mean, that is a really good device to like actually get people hooked because they get value, right? They literally are like, oh, now I actually get to leave at 5 o'clock. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It is very cool. And that's exactly what I do. And, in terms of gaining momentum, right? Literally snowballing the enthusiasm and the effect for it.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is like even in those processes, those are whether they be very small or large scale, either scenario is when you're actually going through that whole process where you start to uncover those gaps that you were talking about earlier, right? Like, where's your data? Like, where is this stuff living? Like, what parts need to connect? Like, who's going to maintain this afterwards? That it is a much better way to get someone on board and like maybe getting those kind of consistent reps in to think about, okay, this is actually how you can apply the AI to your business, to actually work well, right? And that it's not a one and done thing, but like you add kind of things to it.
Exactly. It's additive. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I want to tell
Okay.
you. I want to tell you a quick story also, and I don't know if I told you this, but it also kind of points to like, and maybe it sidetracks, but it kind of points to like some of the things that people like us are challenged by. I saw a case study the other day. I think I saw it on Reddit, and I teach this class, and so which is on product development with using AI. So I have a lot of like conversations about, oh, we could do this and that. And so there was a product that was developed that's similar to some of the things that I hear students talking about. And it's a product that I actually had thought about developing myself, where somebody had built out, I don't know what they built it in, obviously with AI, and they had built out a successful product that basically helps people monitor their subscriptions and then that pulls down their subscription costs because it helps you, advises you on things you're not using or whatever. So very like useful from it, very useful, and something that's like, obviously a B2C solution, right? Like it's something that anybody can use, and oh, I need that. And so the developer who was, I mean, probably a relatively new developer, started marketing this thing and started getting people subscribing to it. And inside of a week or two, got some distribution, got like, and people were using it. And the problem was that because of the way it was built, it was relying too much on AI. And so it was costing thousands and thousands of dollars in tokens. So it was working. It was like something people wanted. It was like designed well. It was doing a service. And yet, because of the way AI works, it kept on hitting all the tokens from like, OpenAI or whatever. And the cost of running the software was so huge that he had to cancel it. He had to shut it down. So I think the thing is that like, when we're going back to like figuring out how we can help customers and clients, I think it's probably best to kind of start small, get rid of the hype, figure out what works, build something that you can prove, test, support, and then be additive.
Yeah. So basically, all of those things have become somewhat easier, but none of it is still straight up easy.
No, fortunately. Maybe I mean, it's easier. You don't have to type as much. You can
Yeah.
talk to your computer. That's
Voice
easy.
dictation for the win. We should talk about that another time around multimodal. But no, I agree and I appreciate that story. But yeah, it makes me feel better about the stuff that I'm working on this week, Dan. Thank you for letting me start off the conversation, venting my frustration. But I think I've got some good takeaways in terms of how to have those conversations, like moving forward, and even how I can make that more of a foundational part of my framework in terms of, projects for clients or even for myself.
Great. I want to build something with you soon. I have some ideas, but I'm not going to say them here out loud. But we will.
No, yeah, people will have to wait and see.
Yeah, I've got. Yeah, yeah. We'll talk afterwards.
Yeah, we will. But okay, good luck with your projects, Dan. I'll talk to you
Thanks,
later.
you too. Okay. Bye.